Okay, well, we should probably get going because we only have an hour, and I want to leave plenty of time for Mary Beth and Colin to make the presentations and also some time for questions and answers. Thank you very much for showing up. I think everybody knows these are extraordinary times. It's not often that you get to face a $33 million budget cut. At least that's for the first year. We'll see what happens next year. So anyway, Mary Beth or Colin, which one of you want to lead off?
Well, I'll yield the floor to Colin if he wants to get us started.
Yeah, and we're here today. Good to see everybody. Wish I could see you all in person, but we're really here today to have an open conversation. So didn't intend to come and show you a bunch of presentations. As Jerry mentioned, you all know the budget difficulties that we have this year. I think we have a pretty good plan to overcome that over this budget year and the coming couple. Just in overview, a couple things I'll say. We've been trying to do continually improve in getting things up, getting the resources up on the budget website. So if you go on the budget planning and management website, for example, there are a number of dashboards there that show reserve positions in various areas, and also the 2021 budget. This year we have about a 5-page introduction to that I think does a pretty decent job of laying out in words the challenges we're facing and how we're planning to overcome that. Most of you are aware that as Jerry said, we have about a $33 million issue at the campus level. That's on a budget of operating budget of about $491 million. And generally our plan for this year is to address that through some permanent savings. About half of that number was caused by a cut in our state appropriations of about $16 million. So we really need to step up to that, and we are stepping up to a large part of it, about 13 million of it in permanent reductions we're taking. A lot of that we're able to do this year because we're in this virtual mode. We had tracked at the end of 1920 from March through the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, the university actually built its reserves, its operating reserve across all divisions by about $10 million. And that was basically due to a couple of things. It was the hiring chill was a big part of that. We had some labor savings there, but then also operationally, we've reduced our expenditures quite a bit. So we've been very intentional about that as a university this year. I know Mary Beth and I have made sure that we're tracking purchasing. We have all but eliminated a lot of the capital projects that we do out of the operating fund. So effectively, everything that we're doing now is dedicated state capital outlay projects funded by the Chancellor's office. So we've been forced to do a few things like that are saving some money. But that really is allowing us to put about $20 million of that 33 million to cover about 20 million of it with one-time sources, basically a number of reserves, divisional reserves, and some of the central reserve that we have. I think strategically our plan has been, like most campuses, to try to use those reserves over a 3-year period, if necessary, to get us through this challenging time. And most of you know the governor has indicated, and all the state projections are, it's going to be a pretty rough period for a couple of years here. There is a bit of bright news that I saw in the last couple of weeks, in that the governor had estimated about $54 billion over a 3-year period in lost revenue for the state. That we're tracking a lot better this year. We're tracking about $8 billion better than they thought. So that's good news. But the caution there is The assumption is that's largely due to a lot of the stimulus dollars that are out there, the federal unemployment and a lot of the stimulus dollars that are going to folks are going back out into the economy, and it's showing up in the tax returns. So how long that's sustainable, we don't know. But that's going to help the system going into 21-22 budget planning, which we're starting to do now. Actually this week at the Board of Trustees, the trustees will start their formal planning for the 21-22 year. So that simple fact will allow us to be a little more aggressive on it. But overall, I feel pretty good about our plan for this year, but a lot of it's going to depend on what happens next year. I'll report a little bit, Mary Beth, on the early exit program. The early exit program, we had 105 participants, and the total salary value there is about $8.1 million. So that was really right on target with what we wanted to do as a campus. We were hoping that we got at least 7 to 7.5 million, and we were trying to cap it at no more than 10. So that worked out pretty well. Question, or was that just a? I'll never be able to answer that person's question. He's going to ask me something really hard, why the sky's blue or something. Anyway, I think our challenge will be to try to maintain, and this is what the cabinet's been talking about, try to maintain at least half of those savings. In addition to maintaining some of the chill savings. I know in admin and finance, of that 8.1 million, I'm going to say like 35% of it's probably in our division. The majority of it is obviously going to be in academic affairs just because of the size of the division. But admin and finance has obviously an extraordinary amount of folks that are doing a lot of the office work. So we were hit pretty hard. We've been doing a lot of shifting around of positions, a lot of reorganization. It's actually a pretty healthy thing, but it's difficult. But I think we'll be able to maintain quite a bit. In fact, what we're doing, and I'll let Mary Beth speak to academic affairs, but in admin and finance, we're trying to go well beyond. I'm holding my departments on the refilling of positions back quite a bit beyond what we technically needed to save, because I want to prepare us for 21-22 so that we're able to, if we have a good outcome, we're in a better position to maybe fill some of those things. But we're holding things down pretty tightly, and one of the primary reasons there is we've been able to mitigate the vast majority of layoffs on this campus. We have had some, but they're primarily in the enterprise areas. Parking and housing have had some, and we have a couple positions in the performing arts area. We've successfully been able to relocate the majority of people into other open positions, so we've been able to save a lot of jobs that way. But we want to make sure that we're not overfilling positions and then coming back in the next year with in a situation where we need to take further action. So I don't know, Mary Beth, I'm saying a lot there, but do you want to jump in at all?
Oh, I guess you're covering it pretty well. I would add that this year, because we've been all virtual and we're not traveling, are we? Then it's easier to keep our operating expenses across academic affairs low. And so it does worry me that the next academic year, and one of the reasons we've been pretty tight this year, is next academic year, a lot of that stuff will get restored, won't it? And so we'll be doing more things on campus, and we'll be going to conferences and stuff. It'll be harder to keep our operating expenditures low. So that's one of the reasons for our concern over what next year's budget will look like. Both we're afraid of getting cut again, and so having another cut to have to absorb, and then we're worried about, on the expenditure side, worried about keeping those expenditures low. So I'd also just add on the early exits, I think there were probably 50 in academic affairs, all told. And of course, because we're our staff and faculty across the university are so varied, and the work they do is so varied, college to college, area to area, that it's harder, I think, for us to really get a handle on how to restructure. It's not like we were all super overstaffed to begin with. And so trying to get a handle on how to restructure and preserve some labor cost savings. So one of the things that I've asked your dean and spoken of a couple of different times is, let's think in terms of what could we do in the short run. So what might we do over the next 18 months that would get us over the worst of the budget? And then we can think longer term, what do we need to do in refilling positions? So, you know, that's a way to break this down into maybe more manageable decision making. So. And so, you know, the other stuff I would say is what Colin just said about, you know, we're so lucky that we have the reserves that we have. So academic affairs, and y'all have heard me say this before, we all took across every division in the university, we swept some of the carry forward across all these divisions. And it's like we put all that carry forward into a big bucket. And then we passed it back out again, right, to the divisions, so that we're backfilling our budget holes with this one-time money. So in academic affairs, for example, our donation across the whole division to that central bucket was about $8.5 million. And then what we got back was about $14 million. So that in our budget now, and all of you who look at budget spreadsheets at all have seen that in the spreadsheets, is that, you know, we're backfilling to the tune in academic affairs to the tune of about $14 million. And so it's really important to us to have reserves that we can also plug in next year and the year after. At the end of 3 years, we think the budget's going to be looking a little bit better, but we do not want to use up all our reserves in the first year, or even in the first 2 years, because we think the consequences, what we'd have to do going forward would be even worse. So Colin, unless you have something to add, I think we're probably ready to take whatever questions you might have.
Sounds good.
Hi, Mary Beth. It's Mary Pat. I'm just wondering that 14 million that you just said, that is basically what you're expecting to lose next year that we haven't lost this year. And how does that get, I don't know, distributed across the colleges? I mean, out of your area.
So I'm not going to show you the screen that shows exactly how the colleges are done, but every college got an allotment of general fund money, you know, your usual budget, and also an infusion of these one-time funds that means that every college took about a 7.5% haircut in their budget this year. So every college has a little bit different overall budget, but everybody ended up with that combination of the general fund money and the one-time money. So next year, in order to do this, you know, again, part of the money in the general fund and part of the money in the one-time money, then academic affairs has got to be able to donate another 8.5 million into that. So I'm very hopeful that we won't have to come back to the colleges to sweep any more of the carry forward. So in central academic affairs, then we are holding tight so that we'd be able to make that contribution to the overall budget again. So Colin, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, Mary Pat, it just just one thing I'd point out is I mentioned the buildup of reserve that we had at the end of the 1920 year.
Mhm.
Right now, we're going through the process of, we're just about to start a little bit early on doing a mid-year review so we can project where we're going to be as part of we just met with UPBG last week and talked about this. That's going to help us with our initial planning for 21-22. So we can project if we have some growth there. If you recall what we did this year for this planning year was, we only clawed back the growth reserve. In other words, all the divisions were kept whole to their 18-19 level. It's just the amount that they grew in 19-20. I think we may be in a good position to do something similar to that, depending on how much savings we're seeing. We just didn't want to start trying to analyze it too early. We needed to get a little bit further through the semester to do that. But that could help us. You know, basically, Mary Beth kind of said it this way a little bit. We're buying time. You know, hopefully, if we can buy 2 or 3 years without going too dramatic in our cuts, that's why we only took a portion of it this year. We didn't, you know, in the middle of COVID, we didn't want to just cripple ourselves in being able to meet our mission. So there is a balancing act here, but we're going to know that the big date coming up is January 10th, when the governor is going to release his initial budget proposal. And then we'll see what he's signaling. Normally it doesn't vary in most years greatly from that in the end. So once we have that, we'll have a look at where our reserves are, and we'll just be very, very clear in how we're going to plan to use those.
Thank you.
So I noticed that someone, I think Dr. Shubin had asked in the chat about changing the number of sabbatical leaves. And no, we're quite fortunate. We are not facing having to reduce the number of allocated sabbaticals for this year. So that's same as whatever it was last year.
I have a question related to your comment about our mission. As students are enrolling for spring, should we be looking to hold the line on sections, or should we be looking to meet student demand?
Boy, that is an excellent, excellent question, Dr. Gray. I would say that we need to be very, very wary of running any low enrolled sections. That'll use up the money very fast, as you know. So we don't want students, we do want students to be able to make progress towards their degree. So we got to be thoughtful before we start axing things out. But that's something really, really to keep an eye on, because, you know, nothing burns up your budget faster than running a bunch of 10 people sections. So everybody, please do keep an eye on that. You know, at this point, you know, we have a reasonable idea of what spring would look like. And so we can probably do a good job. You know, this fall was really much more stochastic in the sense than, you know, higher variance than in other years, because, you know, we had, as it turned out, 700 fewer freshmen than we anticipated, and about 700 more, those numbers aren't exact, transfers. And so that created demand for courses that we didn't expect, and decreased demand in other areas. But if somebody will read me that question in the chat, it was about RTP.
Mary Beth, it says, will the budget cuts impact RTP, specifically promotions and early promotion considerations?
Well, probably the short answer is no. Now, Nate Thomas and I haven't done it yet, but we are sending out another letter that people can take if they want an extension on their probationary period due to their research being negatively affected by COVID, not being able to do your research, you know, then you can a probationary faculty can request another leave. I don't expect, I mean, it would be, I guess, unprecedented if we were to do away with the promotion raises, et cetera, if that's what that question is really about. So. So, you know, this year we were very cautious about hiring, and so I know that that meant really that it was only the positions that had been chilled in the spring, and those were about the only ones. There was maybe two other positions that were allocated for faculty hiring. And so what I'm hopeful that that things will be a little better, as Colin said, and we won't be in the position of hiring zero. I know at some CSU campuses, they're actually not doing any hiring at all this next year. So us and Long Beach are in there with about 19 hires.
Mary Beth, can I just add to Dr. Gray's question on mission? One area, Dr. Gray, we talked with the UPVG, the planning group, about was getting faculty feedback related to, I mean, we've made this dramatic shift, and there's some things that we know that we need to invest in, and specific, you know, technology is one, for example. But we're learning as we go through the year, which are the maybe costly tools that are really valuable and which are not proving out as well. That's just one example of areas where we really need to get some feedback so that we're targeting resources for priorities that are, some of these are going to be permanent shifts, I would imagine. You know, we're probably never going to go back to something that looks substantially like it was before. And so that is critical feedback that we need this year. The times are just changing. We want to make sure that we're planning in advance. We have the opportunity to use our CARES Act funding for a lot of that. We have about $7 million. I'm staying with technology now, but it's just one example. We have about $7 million tagged for that this year. All that money has to be expended by May. But we need to start thinking about all those things, licenses, for example, that are going to be multi-year, their annual licenses, and figuring out how are we going to fund those going forward. So any feedback that we can get into the university budget planning group, and Dr. Shubin is actually a member there, would be really helpful.
So I had this really good meeting with the Educational Resources Committee last week, and one of the things we talked about was just what Colin was saying, that post-pandemic, the university's not going to, everything's not just going to snap back to the way it was, and it shouldn't, right? So they were eager to be involved in doing some analysis of what do we want to do? Thinking both of the cost of instruction, but also in student outcomes, learning outcomes. What kind of combination do we want of hybrid and in-person and online courses? And so it changes the conversation so much, doesn't it? I mean, we are not going to be space constrained, classroom space constrained for a while. And so we ought to take advantage of the opportunity to really be thoughtful. We have to be mindful of accreditation issues in various areas. We have to be, certainly concerned with student performance and how they feel, what collection of kinds of courses they want. But this is a real opportunity to get ahead of this and try to understand it now. So I'll bet that some of you, I know I've talked to some of y'all, have talked about how surprised you were at being able to make the switch to virtual, even though you'd never done it before, and it's being an effective way to teach. There's not that's not going to be true for every course, obviously, but this is the time to get our hands around that so we can make some good plans. There's
a couple of questions in the chat. one of them, if each college receives the same percentage cuts, won't that negatively impact some colleges more than others? Just hypothetically, is there any consideration for the colleges that actually have some in-person and expensive courses labs?
Well, I would say that the first way you deal with this kind of negative economic news is you have to share that burden across. And so that in areas where there are expensive to run courses, so where there's been a lot of PPE needed, for example, in your labs and stuff, those additional resources have been there. And so there is, I think, some compensation for the additional costs for some of those high cost areas. So in the longer run, and I've talked about this with the deans, I've talked about this with some of you all as well. I think maybe we talked about it at UPVG, is the need to get to do a more deeper look at every college budget and see if it really is where it needs to be. You know, what we followed here at CSM for a long time is what a whole lot of places do. It's incremental budgeting. So basically you get what you got last year, you know, with some adjustments, schedule adjustment money. And that incremental budgeting works really well until it doesn't fit anymore. And so a real attempt to be more strategic. And I think that might get at that one issue that was raised as well.
Okay, and then another question, has there been any encouraging news from the CO about specific broader funding for states and higher ed, given the promises made by the Biden campaign?
Well, that's an oxymoron. There's never encouraging news from the CO right now, just kidding. No, we haven't got, there certainly is hope there. We haven't gotten into the specifics yet, but I imagine, Jerry, that the next time the Vice President for Admin and Finance meet fairly regularly, we're going to begin talking about this, and it'll become apparent what's going to evolve out of there. There's certainly a lot more hope that there's going to be a stimulus program out there that could be really meaningful for us. You know, we've had some just really broad discussion about the possibility of a second wave of CARES funding, which would be huge for us because it would address potentially a lot of what we were just talking about. You know, we did put a fairly sizable amount of money towards, as Provost Walker said, PPEs and things like that, but also course packs, right, for lab courses. I think, look, we've all been frustrated that, you know, none of us thought that we were going to be virtual in spring. We didn't consider that it would go on that long initially. And when you start to hear people talk about fall, it makes me shudder. But I think we really need to pivot to start thinking about what is it going to take to get students back in the particular in the labs, right? Not just to say, well, we can't do the labs. We'll probably have to do a little bit of leading on the higher education side with the health departments about how we can do it safely. And that probably means doing it in a way that's far more costly than anything we've ever done. But Jerry and I had I thought a really good conversation last week about this, because I just called and asked him, you know, in the sciences, how long can we go like this, right? Students need to be taking physical labs. There's only so much you can do online. So I would encourage all of us to think about that, and whatever it means, potentially we're going to have another round of resources that we could get through that period and actually be able to provide maybe there's some innovative ideas about how we can do these labs.
Yes, I did send out an email to the department chairs to ask them to start thinking about this and come up with some ideas.
I like Mary Pat's answer to Simon's question. And I would just add to that on, the question was on, is there any will on the part of the Board of Trustees to raise student fees? This has been an issue for a decade. You know, we've had student fees locked. The trustees are, I can tell you right now, they've gone even more towards the side of they're just not willing to look at fee increases. They've been stagnant for a number of years. the reality is it's not sustainable. But that's where they're at. So I don't, if you ask my opinion on that, sitting in all those trustee meetings and dealing with the finance committee, I don't see them moving in that direction, which puts additional pressure on us. If that's the case, the state's going to need to step in and fund us more, or it's going to have an impact on our enrollment.
Well, it's hard to believe that they're going to have the will to raise the tuition or the fees in the midst of the kind of economic stress that everybody is struggling with. So, but maybe when we start coming out on the other side of this, then there'll be a little bit more willingness to consider that. I mean, in real terms, you know, our tuition has fallen, right? Tuition and fees have fallen over the past. How long has it been since they raised it? 10 years?
It hasn't been that long, but it was 2017.
Okay. Oh, okay. That was sooner than I thought.
One year of raise, and the problem is, look, we all know this. We should have an incremental small increase each year, or a set rate for a student as they go through their 4 years. We need something like that. It's been, you know, there's a recommendation document that was done a decade ago that's still up on the Chancellor's Office site on that, and it's gathering dust at this point. But until we do that, we're going to struggle. We're going to fall behind, as you said.
Yeah, even with the $1 billion cut to the CSU back in 2007, 2008, and with those tuition increases that were approved, that only covered about half of the cut. So I wouldn't get too optimistic about tuition increases bailing us out of this.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right. And what Colin just said, I mean, if it goes on for too long, then it does affect the number of students we can serve, right? And it affects the quality. Something's got to give. And so I think that, you know, let's hope we don't get to that point.
Mary Beth, this is Tim Carroll. You talked a little bit about enrollment, but I wonder if you can go a little bit further about talking how do we prioritize meeting student demand. In my department, you know, we've cut everything we can this year, and the only tools to cut further is teaching assistants and part-time faculty. And the only way to do that is to cancel classes. We went through a number of scenarios early in the spring, and they were extremely demoralizing. You know, 10% budget cut was potentially going to eliminate nearly a third of our FTE in order to meet our budget. So I wonder, you know, as we go forward, what's going to take priority, the budget or enrollment?
Well, I mean, we have been lucky that our enrollment has stayed strong, but we can't make money when there's not any, right? So one of the things that has happened, you know, in some colleges, everybody's doing things a little differently. But one thing that's happened in one college is, you know, all the chairs are teaching a class. You know, you could consider now, so that immediately puts some more people, cover some more classes, right? You can decide now which of the classes can stand a 10 student increase in the cap size and which ones can't, right? And so these are decisions you can make for the short run. Maybe none of these you like in the longer run, but you know, we have to kind of set, when we have the opportunity, we have to choose which of it's, what did one of my provost colleagues called it, a set of suboptimal solutions, right? Because none of them are the way that we want to work things, but there you go. So we have been so lucky compared to some of the places which have gone way farther than we have in these different areas.
Yeah, I would just add, Tim, I think, you know, we're going to have to make some really hard decisions. And we've had times in a camp, you know, the last several years we've prioritized, and I'm glad we have, funding, funding course sections and making sure students could get the classes they need. But if we go back a decade or so, we were artificially limiting. You'll remember we had caps on the units on the first go around for students, and that held that average unit load down. That unit load has increased dramatically by design as part of the GI 2025, which is great. But if the state doesn't continue to fund that, the Chancellor's Office, I would guess this week what you're going to see is the initial request that they're putting together for the trustees to go out to state is to fund not only GI 2025 ongoing dollars at probably, who knows, 75 million for this year, but also to go back and get the amount last year that they didn't fund. Because we can't continue to we can't sustain this enrollment at those average unit loads, and be over, we're 2 to 3%, I think, over enrolled this year. We just can't continue to do that. And so we're gonna have to grapple with those decisions, because I think, these questions all get to the quality of what we're providing for the students that are here.
Hi, Mary Beth. This is Dick Heermans. I know a lot of the faculty in our department are really concerned about the large grant release time being dipped into to support some of these budget cuts. And I was wondering if there's been any discussion about reallocation of indirect costs in this whole discussion.
Well, don't give Colin any ideas, Dick. He might not have been aware of that. Last year we started talking, and then it just got pushed right off the table with COVID. But we started talking about really trying to get a handle on the whole research infrastructure from top to bottom. And so looking at all the different, building out a better infrastructure and that looks better. So there's absolutely no decision or nothing about, dipping into that pool of funds. I think that as we look at and come up with a structure for our research infrastructure, then there'll be tons of stuff, that we'll be looking at, but nobody's looking at that. So.
I just saw a memo come across on that the other day, Mary Beth, and it never crossed my mind to touch that until Dick said that.
I'm hoping a bunch of you all will participate in that work that we're going to do to figure out what we need to do to change the research infrastructure and make it stronger. So we need input, wide input, and a lot of people's eyes on what's going on here and what's going on at other places and what do we need to do better. So I think that's critically important. So I hope that, I know many of you are very well-funded researchers, and I hope you'll participate in some of that work, which we are actually, Sherry Schrager is helping kind of put together a timeline to attack some of that. Did any of you listen to Dr. I see that Dr. Allen says we did a report in 2017, but nothing happened as a result of that, right? I mean, and I could be wrong. I wasn't here in 2017, but I talked to Chris Kachikian about this, and we there's still the need, to be looking at everything from pre-award and post-award all the way through in order to get a better handle on this. I'll be happy to go back and look at that 2017 report if you think there's really some valuable stuff in there. I was looking at everything with fresh eyes.
Thank you for that, because there's some of us, before I FERPed, I put a lot of work into that with meetings and time, and I would like to see it resurrected. I think it had some really good points and some really good recommendations, and I realize it was before you were there. Mary Beth. So thank you.
We won't reinvent the wheel if we don't need to.
Exactly.
Well, I think with the loss, the sudden disappearance of our former provost, that just simply got tabled.
Ouch.
This one's sticking around if I have anything to say about it.
Hey, did y'all listen to, yes, Dr. Crowhurst, we did start. You know, we had a meeting and we talked about getting involved in this. And then, you know, we all went virtual and that just got pushed to the back of the queue.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you know, in many ways, finally now, you know, for a long time, it seemed like it was still March. You know, months would go by, but it was still March 2020 because we were just, you know, barely keeping our heads above water. So, you know, now's the time. Actually, we should have started before November, but we need to get this moving so that we can get anything new in place in by the next academic year. So that
I mean, we tried to do, you know, we were working on it, but we also got a little bit taken off the rails by some of the faculty who wanted to do their own lobbying, I suppose, for other things. So that also kind of, you know, the combination of those two things took everything off track. So
Right. But it's time now. We've got, you know, we kind of have the luxury of planning time now because we don't have any money. So, but I started to say a couple times, President-elect Beck in her kind of interview talk that was last week, she talked about funded research and the research infrastructure right there. I thought that was a very good sign.
yeah, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to Tim Carroll's question again, because it was really frustrating in our departments when we tried to make these budget cuts. We were told we had to make a 10% cut of the whole 100%, but only from 17% of the budget, which was effectively 65% cut to all of our TA support, which is our graduate student support, or our part-timers, our part-timer support, or the pretty small budget we have in the department for things like copy paper. So I guess my question is, from the university level, is there anybody like who's in charge of thinking, I mean, we literally can't make these cuts and maintain FTES and maintain graduation rates if we gut our laboratories essentially. So it seems like something bigger has to be done, like reorganization at some level of the university. And I'm wondering what the discussions have been at the university level for really reorganizing the infrastructure to do some substantial cuts, because just asking us to make 10% is really doesn't seem feasible in the situation that our departments are set up right now.
Well, you know, I would say a couple of things, and then I'm gonna throw the mic over to Colin. One of the things is across the university, we did reduce lecturer numbers. I mean, most CSUs did. So that was the way, you know, as reassigned time got reduced in department after department, college after college, then that meant that tenure line faculty were in the classroom and there were fewer lecturers being hired. That is, you know, a sad reality of a way to deal with it. So certainly that did happen. Then the other thing I would say is when all this hit in the spring, dear God, we had no, you know, it was such a sudden, I mean, the state budget just, you know, fell like a stone. I was in this meeting with some of the people from the legislative analyst office, and they were going, we've never seen anything like this in our lives. And I was just horrified by this. I asked the question, is the state going to come and sweep our carry forwards? I think they actually have the right to do that in in a big enough emergency. So, we didn't know what was going on. And so we've made pretty good adjustments that we think would be enough to carry us over. You're absolutely right, Dick, that we can't stay in this short-term crunch of not being able to, to move forward in all these different ways. I mean, there's all kinds of good ideas that we need to pursue, but we can, get through in a real short-term basis. So, Colin, you want to jump in there?
I'll just say, Dick, I'm 100% in on. I would love to have the central budget office get involved with the right group of people to start looking at this and thinking, how can we make a significant organizational change? We're doing it in other areas now, administratively. You can imagine, for example, what's happened with the enterprise areas, student housing and parking. They both lost 90% of their revenue. So student housing will lose $24 million in revenue this year, out of 28, something like that. So we're looking at combining resources to, financial management, for example, and just rethinking across divisional lines. But enrollment is such a huge issue for us on the budget tracking front that I would love to get involved with just think tanking that and working with you on it. You're absolutely right. We have to do it. It just doesn't make sense to continue to work the way we have traditionally, where, as much as I'm going to say, I feel like at this campus, we're pretty efficient. I mean, I think you all know, you've made it clear, there's not a lot of fat, but that doesn't mean that we can't just rethink some of the, we do replicate a few things across divisions in some areas. So I'd be all for looking at that. And sometimes I think with the folks in the central budget office we have some people that actually have academic affairs experience, but not being in the middle of it, they're going to bring a lot of different ideas, I think, to the table.
Did you were there any specific things you were thinking of that you would want to throw on the table?
No, I was just curious from the university perspective, whether you do you value FTES more or research more or graduation rates more, because it feels like from the faculty perspective, we're being asked to do more of everything and now giving less resources to do it. So it becomes very frustrating. And I mean, as the chair of my department, I don't know what to tell my faculty if teaching is more important or research is more important or graduating students is more important. And frankly, for RTP, the research is sort of front and center. And so we get a lot of mixed messages. So I wanted to hear from you, where are these, if there's any sort of campus-wide reorganization, what sort of priorities are you going to place on that? Is it going to be, the research-heavy colleges or the teaching-heavy colleges or the FTES colleges? I just want to get your perspective on that.
Well, I mean, we have to focus on core mission, and our core mission is our students, right, and educating our students. And research is right there with that. If you think about how much it affects students' ability to succeed and the high impact that the work that they do with y'all in the labs, et cetera, how important that is. So, I'm not going to say research takes a second, but clearly student success is the first thing. And you're right. And I've actually gotten worried, not just about our students, but about our faculty and about our staff, who this has been incredibly stressful. And it continues to be stressful. And everybody is pushed to doing more and struggling with students who have just a whole host of new real anxieties. I mean, serious stuff that's worrying them. Everybody's burning out on this. So it is something we're really worried about. We've talked about what on earth can we do, to alleviate the morale issue right now. And maybe there's a couple of ideas, but obviously nothing that's going to perfectly take care of it, because we have to get over this really rough period.
I'll give you my opinion from the FTS side. I mean, we've been over enrolled forever here at Cal State Northridge. So if we have to make hard decisions at some point, you know, we've got over 2,000 students that are supported solely by their fee revenue. And we just had a discussion about, frankly, how low fee revenue is in the state of California comparatively across the nation. So it never has been sustainable, and now the rubber's really hitting the road when we're in a difficult situation. So we have to think about that. If the Chancellor's Office funded our enrollment to the level it's at, we'd have 2,000 more students funded to another several $1,000s per head, and we'd be in a lot better shape financially. So how long can we continue to be over enrolled to the tune of, I think our overall over enrollment now is probably 8%, something like that, maybe even 9%. So there's no magic solution. I think, Dick, what you mentioned, those are 3 fundamental areas that you mentioned. So there's no magic solution. We have to make some hard decisions. One of them might be, hey, we need to impact and we need to get the enrollment down to where our students are fully funded, where we're getting the state allocation and the fee revenue, each of which comprise about half of, our budget is roughly 50% funded by each of those, our operating budget. So that's probably the first thing I would say if we really wanted to get serious about it. But of course, that goes right into the wheelhouse of student success. How do you get your FTEs down, right, while providing continual growth in the average unit load, which is now probably in the 12.7 range, something like that, and probably needs to be. We mapped this out years ago when they started talking about GI 2025. I was sitting down there at the Chancellor's office, mapping out what it would take us to get there. And it's probably, you really need your average unit load at about 13.5, right? Well, if your fee revenue is locked, right, and everybody that takes 6.1 units or more pays the same amount, that's just additional expense with no revenue. So we're going to have to deal with that.
It is a system where our success pushes us into bankruptcy, right? Our success at the higher average unit load and is getting us into worse trouble in terms of finances. The other thing is the over-enrollment. Over-enrollment, so, oh, that's good, we get the fee revenue, but that is a short-run solution, isn't it? Because now you don't have you're not fully funded to hire faculty, hurt your tenure density, et cetera, if you keep on over-enrolling, so.
Yeah. So Mary Beth this is again, you go back to the obvious things that have been laid down in a report on a sustainable financial model years ago for the trustees is if you're funding based on FTE, but you're getting fee revenue based on headcount effectively, you have this wide divide, and the student should probably be paying per unit. Mary Pat's right on that.
You can probably check with our department chairs, but we have the same bankruptcy model for research.
Well, Dean Stenner, we have to talk about that.
Are there any discussions? Where are we at with talks about furloughs?
Hasn't been any serious talk at the system level yet. I think that any discussion on that will probably occur after January 10th when we see what's in the governor's budget, and we know as a system where we're at. You remember, the campuses are all a bit different. I would say most of the larger campuses are somewhat similar to us, and they have this 3-year plan to use the available operating reserves that they have. But I think they're going to have to survey across the system where folks stand. You had campuses doing different things. There's some campuses that are doing absolutely no layoffs. I don't know how they're doing that in the enterprise areas where, parking, for example, where the revenue is completely gone and there's no state support there. But I think we're just going to have to see where we are January 10th. And any discussion on furloughs has to be done at the system level from a bargaining perspective, because furloughs are not in the bargaining agreements, right? There's layoff provisions in those bargaining agreements that are very clear, but there are no furlough discussions in there whatsoever. So that has to be taken off the table and bargained off to the side with the units. That's what happened last time when we did it. So could it happen? Yeah, I mean, there's been, you know, we've all had our own internal discussions on it, but there hasn't been anything formal on that.
Now, that hasn't come up at all. Another thing I think we all ought to think about and be aware of is sustainable revenue sources. And I think that there are some opportunities for us in this college and in other colleges to create, and it's absolutely core mission, if we create some more master's programs, probably start them through extended learning, because that's a faster way to start. And, you know, successful ones then actually have a big return back to the colleges. And so if we think about that and think creatively about that, that goes a long way towards helping pay for research, for example, if we're creative in that direction. I also think it's a good area for us to be in. If you look around the people in the San Fernando Valley, adult workers who want to reskill or upskill, this recession probably has given some folks ideas that they might want to change their job prospects. So we do have opportunities there.
Karen's correct, by the way. She put the message there about the faculty would have to agree to furloughs. It's not in the bargaining agreement, and it is this. That's consistent with the other bargaining groups. None of them have furloughs in the agreements.
Mary Beth, maybe I can ask one, this is Simon Garrett. Maybe I can ask one that's maybe going to be a little contentious. This came from one of my colleagues. This doesn't necessarily come from me, but they assert that the primary mission of the university is teaching. And it seems to some of us that maybe over the past few years, CSUN has ramped up a lot of those peripheral or support services for students. And I'm not saying that they're not worthy and that students don't deserve them in a holistic kind of a fashion. But maybe when budgets get tight, maybe we need to sort of think about scaling back some of those support things so that we can concentrate on our teaching. My colleague mentioned the Sustainability Center. I don't know, there's a million things you could pick on, right? And I don't know that that's a fair example to pick on, but given that our mission is really teaching, should we be really spending money on things like food pantries and non-teaching activities?
Well, I mean, if we getting through this year, and if things look really dire in terms of next year's budget, everything goes on the table. And so we start thinking about those things. That food pantry, that's donation based, right? So there's not institutional dollars really that go into that. But I think in terms of really taking a harder look on the whole enterprise, I mean, God, you guys have heard me say this before probably, but across the Midwest, universities were in dire financial straits before COVID. And so this has just put some of them, so they are, just going over every single thing and what can they cut and what can they eliminate and what can they do. We are not in that situation right now. I think we are extremely lucky. What Colin said is right. I mean, it's not like we're got a ton of fat there, but we aren't to that level yet. And so, but if we need to be, some of those different things go on the table. A lot of the student support services, stuff that happens in student affairs or advisement, et cetera, those are core to student success. I mean that you really can't run of the staff members who are just pushed to the limit. It's the counselors, and the advisors. They are booked 24/7 practically in terms of the trying to help students figure out everything going forward. So student support services wouldn't be the first place you'd go, but I take your point.
Simon, I just add on, that it's a good example to talk about the Sustainability Center. That particular center and that activity is funded by AAS, so it's not out of the operating budget. It comes out of the ASB. However, we have a Sustainability Institute and they actually provide resources for the campus, so it helps the operating fund out there. But if we get to a point where we're making those difficult decisions, we should be looking at some of those services. Maybe some of them have to go to the student supported side, the fee supported side, versus being funded on the operating side. There's probably a few marginal things that we could look at in that area. It gets really difficult though, and I think Mary Beth, to your point, advising is an area where when Mary Beth came, one of the first things we talked about was her concern with the limited level of advising that we have at Cal State Northridge in comparison to our peers across the country. And so we probably need to look, where do we need to invest to be successful, and where can we make, again, some of those tough decisions. Mary Beth, I'm going to answer, Mary Elena asked, where do you see our biggest budget bleeding? And I'll try, I'm assuming you mean from the, on the revenue side. And so probably just to say the biggest areas of concern would be obviously the state side. We took a $16 million permanent hit this year to our operating revenue. So my biggest concern is that they do that to us again in the 21-22 year. We need to be prepared for it to happen and fight tooth and nail to not let it happen. But that's a consideration. And then I think probably the other issue that many of you know we've been dealing with for years and years is just the continuing decline of our non-resident enrollment. If you go back 5 years or so, we were at about 2,300 FTE on non-residents, almost all of them international, about a couple hundred maybe. We're down to about 1,000 now. So that's been a big contributor to some of the difficulties we had. Our budget was really built with that in it, it was dependent on that, and we've had to wean ourselves off that. So we dropped about 14% this year, which is pretty much on par. I was surprised that it wasn't worse, because we've been seeing that kind of decline in the last several years. And then I see a question about, are the students going to build that behemoth 2021? I'm not sure what.
Is that what that's referring to?
Yes, that's a big building that they're planning to do there close to their plaza. That's such a huge expense at this point. I wonder within the AS, they will want to reinject money into the university to help, the department stay afloat and teach the classes they need to graduate.
Yeah, so just, that project was kind of, I wouldn't say it was put on hold, but it wasn't pushed forward in the current environment, obviously. But the students did do a referendum for a pretty major facility, as you're mentioning. This is the expansion in addition to the USU. So it's a good question. I mean, we have to go back to the trustees. That's a student fee, 100%, so that's not operating budget. They voted an increase in the student fee. That would be an interesting thing to put in front of the trustees right now in this environment. So I don't know the answer as to timing on that and when it would go, but it's something, Mary Elena, that we'll be talking with President Back about right away, William Watkins and I, in January, as to where that should set. But I wouldn't see that, the students are not going to push that money into supporting the operating budget. Their fees are not there for that. So I wouldn't see that happening.
Okay, well, we're considerably over time here. I can't thank you enough, Mary Beth and Colin, for meeting with us. And I'm sure that if anybody wants to email them directly, they'll continue to entertain questions or clarify. As I said before, this meeting has been recorded, and I think Rama's going to link it up on our college website so you can look it over again, or those of you, I know there were a number of people who couldn't attend because they were teaching, and so it'll be there for them too. Anyway, thank you very, very much. This has been very informative.
Julie, can I just say, I think speaking for both of us, Mary Beth and I, we would honestly really appreciate any input on, there's a lot of ideas about what we should be thinking about going forward. And we really, as a community, now more than ever need that input. Things have changed dramatically. You all know what's happening in the classroom, whether it's virtual or not. What do we need to be thinking about going forward? Let us know from, so that when we're making those decisions, it's informed.
Yes, ditto. And as some of this other work goes forward, we want to hear from everybody. We want the input. We want the ideas. And just again, what I said before, I know y'all are just pushed and pushed and pushed. So please know we are thinking about you and how hard this is on all of us. So thank y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.